Carl Jung was not concerned with whether a person appeared good to the world. He was more interested in whether a person was whole. And this is not the same thing. In fact, one of his most unsettling ideas was that many people who are seen as good by society are not psychologically healthy at all. On the contrary, their so-called goodness is often a mask, a performance rooted in fear, repression, and self-denial. In a world that constantly rewards politeness, obedience, and self-sacrifice, many people grow up learning to equate being good with being liked. From a young age, we're taught to avoid conflict, to be agreeable, to make others comfortable, even if it means making ourselves invisible. This pressure to please becomes deeply internalized. We believe we are good when we say yes instead of no, when we smile through discomfort, when we swallow our anger instead of expressing it. But Jung warned, there is a price to pay for this kind of surface-level morality. He observed that the more we try to be only good, the more we deny and repress parts of ourselves that don't fit that ideal. Our anger, our jealousy, our ego, our need to assert boundaries. These disowned parts don't disappear. They sink into what Jung called the shadow, the hidden unconscious realm of the psyche, where everything we reject about ourselves is stored. People who cling too tightly to their good persona are often those who are least aware of their shadow. They may be praised for their kindness, their humility, their sensitivity. Yet inside, they are boiling with resentment, confusion, or even despair. The shadow starts to leak through the cracks in subtle, destructive ways: passive aggression, sudden outbursts, depression, self-sabotage. And because they are so identified with being good, they often don't recognize these behaviors as parts of themselves. Jung saw this as a psychological trap. A person who believes they are only good cannot grow. They are stuck in an illusion, blind to their full complexity. In truth, the human psyche is not made to be purely virtuous. It is made to be whole, to contain opposites, contradictions, and paradoxes. Take, for example, someone who is always accommodating, always putting others first. On the surface, they may seem like the ideal friend or partner, but underneath they may be suppressing their own needs, avoiding conflict, or seeking validation through martyrdom. This kind of chronic self-erasure is not a virtue. It's a symptom of fragmentation, a soul divided against itself. Jung did not suggest that we abandon morality or embrace cruelty. What he proposed was far more radical, that we become conscious of all our parts, even the dark, uncomfortable ones, and integrate them into a fuller self. Only then can we choose goodness not as a performance but as a powerful, grounded act of will. He once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. And indeed it is much easier to wear a mask of goodness than to face the truth of who we really are." But as Jung saw it, real goodness is not about denying the shadow. It's about learning to live in harmony with it. The illusion of being good is seductive because it offers comfort and acceptance. But it also weakens us. It makes us compliant, unable to set boundaries, easy to manipulate. Jung believed that morality without strength is hollow. A truly ethical person is not someone who is incapable of doing harm. It's someone who has the capacity for destruction, but chooses discipline. Someone who has faced their inner darkness and learned to govern it. In our culture, being a good person often means being harmless. But Jung flips this on its head. Harmlessness is not goodness. Harmlessness can come from weakness, from fear, from avoidance. True goodness, he argued, is dangerous, because it comes from a place of self-knowledge, self-control, and inner integration. So the next time you find yourself trying to be good, ask, are you being authentic, or are you hiding? Are you living in alignment with your full self, or are you performing a role that earns you love at the cost of your truth? To break the illusion of goodness is painful. It means confronting parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. But it's also liberating, because only when we stop pretending to be good can we begin to be whole. Carl Jung's idea of the shadow is one of the most powerful and disturbing concepts in modern psychology, and also one of the most necessary for truly understanding the human condition. It reveals a simple but uncomfortable truth. Everything you refuse to see in yourself, every impulse you deny, every weakness you hide, every truth you avoid, doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your shadow. For Jung, the shadow is not evil. It is not something to be exiled or erased. It is simply the dark, unconscious part of the self. It contains all the qualities you have disowned, because they didn't fit your idea of who you were supposed to be. These may include aggression, selfishness, envy, lust, arrogance, deceit, anything that contradicts the image of the person you want to be. But here's the twist. Your shadow also holds your potential. It contains your suppressed confidence, your creativity, your assertiveness, your fire. And when you repress your shadow, you don't just deny your bad qualities. You often block your power. Many people are terrified of their shadow. They've been conditioned to think that any dark thought or emotion is a sign of failure. So they build a moral identity, an ego that says, I am kind, I am selfless, I am peaceful. But in doing so, they push everything else out of awareness. Jung warned that this split creates a fragile self. The more we try to be only light, the more violently the darkness will demand to be seen. This is when the shadow emerges, not calmly, but explosively. It can appear in dreams, in irrational anger, in projection onto others, or in breakdowns where the mask of the persona shatters. Let's take an example. Someone who prides themselves on always being calm and in control. On the outside, they appear mature, even enlightened. But if they haven't made peace with their own rage, it will find a way out. Maybe they suddenly explode at a partner. Maybe they feel secretly superior to others, judging anyone who shows anger. Maybe they suppress themselves so deeply that they fall into depression. The shadow always finds a crack. Jung saw this phenomenon again and again in his clinical work. He once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That means accepting not only your strengths, but your flaws, your contradictions, your wounds, your potential for harm. It means recognizing that you too are capable of cruelty, manipulation, selfishness, and that this doesn't make you evil. It makes you human." Facing the shadow requires radical honesty. It's not about indulging your darker impulses or justifying bad behavior. It's about seeing clearly what's inside you, without flinching, and then deciding consciously what to do with it. When you reject your shadow, it controls you from the dark. When you integrate it, you gain power over your life. This is why Jung believed the path to wholeness involves descending into what he called the underworld of the psyche. It's a journey inward, where we confront the monsters we've created by denying them. This descent is not comfortable. It threatens your self-image, your relationships, even your sanity. But it is the only way to become real. Integration of the shadow doesn't mean acting out every impulse. It means making space for it. For example, instead of pretending you're never angry, You learn how to express anger in conscious, constructive ways. Instead of denying your ambition, you explore how to pursue power ethically. Instead of hiding your sexuality, you allow yourself to feel it without shame. In this way, the shadow becomes an ally, not an enemy. It grounds you, it humbles you, and it protects you from becoming inflated with moral self-righteousness. One of Jung's most important insights was that evil doesn't just exist out there in the world. It exists inside every human heart, including yours. And the more you deny this, the more likely you are to project it onto others. This is how wars start. This is how groups dehumanize each other. This is how someone can convince themselves they're saving the world, while actually feeding their own need for control. That's the danger of a rejected shadow. But when you take responsibility for your own darkness, you become less dangerous to others and more trustworthy. You stop needing to dominate, manipulate, or hide. You stop fearing your own truth. The shadow also holds deep emotional truth. Inside it lives your wounded inner child, your unmet needs, your buried grief. Many people avoid their shadow because it contains too much pain. But that pain, when faced with compassion, becomes the doorway to healing. Jung believed that the shadow is the first step in the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your whole self. It is not a one-time confrontation, but a constant relationship. Every time you grow, a new layer of shadow emerges. Every time you level up in life, you must descend again into the parts of yourself you've outgrown or ignored. To know your shadow is to be free, because only when you know what lives in your unconscious can you stop being controlled by it. In a world obsessed with appearances, the shadow is a reminder that your darkness is not a flaw. It's your depth. It's the raw material for wisdom, empathy, and authentic strength. Jung didn't ask people to become perfect. He asked them to become real. And that means embracing the totality of who you are, even the parts you wish you weren't. Carl Jung's work made one truth painfully clear. What you suppress does not go away. It waits. It waits in silence, in dreams, in symptoms, in irrational behaviors, and in the people and situations you attract over and over again. And until you face what you've buried, you are never truly free. One of Jung's most powerful teachings is that the human psyche is not designed to be edited. You cannot cut out the parts of yourself you dislike and expect to function well. The psyche demands wholeness, not perfection. And this is where many good people go wrong. Rather than working to become integrated, to know and harmonize their full selves, they aim to suppress what is unacceptable. They try to be only kind, only calm, only loving, only giving. But this narrow self-concept becomes a prison. It means that any anger, frustration, ambition, or even healthy selfishness is seen as dangerous and must be denied. This form of suppression is often applauded in society. It's mistaken for strength, humility, or spirituality. But Jung saw it for what it really was, a ticking time bomb. Because whatever you suppress turns inward. It becomes anxiety. It becomes shame. It becomes guilt. Or worse, it leaks out sideways through sarcasm, coldness, passive aggression, or sudden rage that seems to come from nowhere. Suppression is not the same as control. It's avoidance, and avoidance leads to fragmentation, the condition of being divided against yourself. The self becomes split between the mask you wear for the world and the truth that lives in your body, your instincts, and your unconscious mind. The longer this split continues, the more you feel disconnected, numb, and exhausted. You may even begin to feel like you don't know who you are anymore. Jung believed the goal of life was individuation, becoming the unique, whole person you were meant to be. And individuation demands integration. It demands that you turn toward the shadow, the inner critic, the child, the rebel, the animal, the wounded lover, and make room for all of them. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or abandoning your values. It means being honest about what's inside you, even if you choose not to express it externally. For example, imagine a person who suppresses all their anger. They believe that being angry makes them a bad person. So they always smile, always agree, always avoid conflict. But under the surface, their anger builds. It might turn into stomach issues, chronic fatigue, or depression. Or it might explode one day in a way that shocks even them. Now imagine the same person, but instead of suppressing their anger, they choose to integrate it. They allow themselves to feel it fully, without judgment. They trace it back to its source. They learn what it's trying to protect. And then, consciously, they decide how to express it. Maybe they assert a boundary. Maybe they write it out. Maybe they use it to fuel change. The anger no longer controls them. It becomes a tool, not a threat. This is the power of integration. It turns chaos into clarity. It turns pain into information. It turns the raw, emotional energy of your inner world into usable insight. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, you don't heal by pretending to be better than you are. You heal by meeting yourself exactly where you are, even in the mess." He also warned against over-identifying with the persona, the social mask we wear. The persona is useful. It helps us function, relate, and adapt. But if you think your persona is your true self, you become hollow. You start living for others' approval, disconnected from your instincts and truth. Integration is about finding the real self beneath the mask. It's about recognizing that your anger may hold your courage. Your jealousy may reveal your deepest desires. Your fear may be protecting your most sacred values. Nothing within you is inherently bad, but everything within you must be seen and owned. In therapy, Jung would guide people into the places they feared most, not to shame them, but to help them reclaim their power. He believed that your greatest gold is hidden in your shadow, but you have to be brave enough to dig. This is why truly integrated people are so rare, and so magnetic. They aren't necessarily the kindest or the calmest or the most agreeable, but they are real. They are rooted. They don't pretend to be something they're not. They've looked into their own darkness and come back wiser. And that wisdom radiates. When you stop suppressing and start integrating, everything changes. Your relationships become more authentic. Your boundaries become clearer. Your energy returns. You no longer waste mental space hiding from yourself. More importantly, you stop being so reactive. You stop blaming others for triggering you because you've already made peace with what's inside. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of explode. You lead instead of follow. Suppression keeps you safe, temporarily, but it costs you your vitality, your clarity, and your sense of self. Integration is riskier. It demands honesty and courage, but it's the only path to true power. So if you feel like you're constantly running from yourself, constantly exhausted from managing your image, consider this. Maybe it's time to stop suppressing. Maybe it's time to turn around and face the parts of you you've been taught to fear. They are not your enemy. They are your missing pieces. Carl Jung never glorified being good in the traditional moral sense. In fact, he warned that trying to be a good person without deep self-awareness can make you profoundly dangerous, both to yourself and others. Why? Because kindness, when misunderstood, becomes a mask, a shield, a trap. It disconnects you from your truth, and ironically, from your capacity for true compassion. Jung saw this pattern often. People who lived their lives desperately trying to be kind, agreeable, selfless. Not because it was always authentic, but because they were terrified of what might happen if they weren't. They feared rejection, conflict, abandonment, or guilt. So they silenced themselves. They put everyone else first. They wore the mask of the peacemaker. But behind the mask was resentment, burnout, loneliness, and sometimes rage. Being too good can be a trauma response. Many people learned in childhood that love had to be earned, by being quiet, by being helpful, by making others happy. So they grew up with an internal rule. If I'm not pleasing people, I don't deserve love. Jung understood that these rules, when unconscious, hijack the adult personality. They drive a compulsive need to be liked, and worse, they create an identity entirely dependent on external validation. But here's the paradox. People who try to be good at all costs often end up doing harm, to themselves and others. When you can't say no, you become a magnet for manipulation. When you suppress anger, it leaks out in passive-aggressive ways. When you avoid conflict, you allow dysfunction to grow. When you hide your real thoughts to protect people, you deprive them of your honesty. And when you constantly rescue others, you prevent them from growing. Jung would argue that this kind of goodness is not goodness at all. It is fear wearing the mask of virtue. True kindness, he believed, is rooted in wholeness. And wholeness requires boundaries, truth, and the courage to be disliked. It requires you to know your shadow and not be controlled by it. It requires you to say, yes, I want to be loving, but not at the cost of my integrity. People who misunderstand kindness tend to be deeply self-sacrificing. They believe it is their duty to carry others' pain. They take responsibility for everyone's emotions. They feel guilty when they put themselves first. But this pattern always collapses. You cannot sustain compassion for others if you are empty inside. Jung saw burnout as the price of self-abandonment. Even worse, chronic niceness can be a form of manipulation. It's not always conscious, but often the person trying to be good is doing so because they expect something in return. Love, safety, loyalty, admiration. And when they don't get it, they become bitter. They say things like, after everything I have done for you, they weaponize their kindness, because it was never fully free in the first place. Jung believed this confusion stems from the refusal to integrate the darker parts of the psyche. People don't want to admit that their kindness might be rooted in fear. They don't want to admit to jealousy, control, or rage, so they suppress it. But what's suppressed does not vanish. It lives in the unconscious and sabotages relationships from below. This is why Jung emphasized that morality must be conscious, not compulsive. If you are kind because you choose to be, from a place of awareness, that's strength. But if you are kind because you're afraid of what will happen if you're not, that's weakness. And this distinction is so critical. Integrated people are not unkind. They are kind with depth. Their kindness has boundaries. Their no is just as strong as their yes. They know when to walk away. They know when to stand their ground. And their compassion is not rooted in self-erasure, but in clarity. Let's consider an example. A nice person might stay in a toxic relationship far too long. They might rationalize their partner's behavior. They might avoid expressing their needs. They might say, "It's not that bad," while quietly suffering. Why? Because they don't want to be seen as selfish, demanding, or ungrateful. They're afraid that asserting themselves will make them bad. Now contrast this with someone who has integrated their shadow. That person still cares, but they also recognize when love becomes enabling. They understand that allowing abuse or neglect is not compassion. It's codependence. They are willing to walk away, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Jung once said, if the doctor wants to guide another or even just accompany him, he must feel with that person's psyche. He never feels it when he passes judgment. Whether he puts his judgments into words or keeps them to himself makes little difference. In other words, judgment blocks connection, but honesty opens it. This is another danger of misunderstood kindness. It often masks judgment. A person might act nice on the surface, but secretly feel superior, morally better than others. This spiritual ego creates distance. Jung called this inflation, the ego puffing itself up through imagined goodness. It's the shadow dressed in white. True kindness is never inflated. It doesn't need to be seen or praised. It simply is. And it comes not from fear, but from integration, from knowing and accepting your own darkness and choosing again and again to act from love, not lack. So if you've been told your whole life to be nice, be good, don't make waves, Jung would invite you to question that. Who benefits from your niceness? Is it authentic, or is it performative? Does it serve your growth, or does it keep you small? When you stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole, your kindness becomes real and powerful, because now it's rooted in truth. It has weight. It has integrity. It's no longer about pleasing others. It's about honoring yourself and others, even when it's uncomfortable. That is the kindness the world actually needs, not performative virtue, but courageous authenticity. The kind of kindness that can say no, that can walk away, that can love fiercely without losing itself. Carl Jung didn't believe in superficial virtue. To him, real strength, real goodness, came not from denying the darkness within, but from confronting it directly and integrating it into a deeper sense of wholeness. In Jung's psychology, the truly good person is not the one who avoids evil, but the one who has encountered their own capacity for it, and chosen, consciously, to align with the light. Most people think of good and evil as opposites, like black and white, with a clear line between them. But Jung believed this was dangerously naive. The psyche is not so cleanly divided. There is darkness within the best of us, and light within the worst. The danger lies not in having a shadow, but in denying it. Jung famously said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." In other words, the more we strive toward goodness, perfection, or enlightenment without confronting the darker sides of our nature, the larger and more dangerous our shadow becomes. This is why people who seem morally perfect often fall the hardest. They are not what they appear, they are what they've hidden. To become whole is not to become flawless. It is to become real. A whole person knows their jealousy, their envy, their pride. They've met their anger, their fears, their compulsions. They are not free from these things. They are free with them. Because when you bring your unconscious patterns into awareness, they stop controlling you from the dark. You begin to choose rather than react. This is what Jung called the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating every part of yourself into a unified whole. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming yourself, completely and truthfully, with nothing left in the shadows. But this path isn't easy. In fact, it often begins with a breakdown, a confrontation with the parts of your life that no longer make sense. You might feel lost, empty, disillusioned. You might question your identity, your values, your relationships. And this is good. Jung saw these moments not as mental illness, but as the psyche's way of breaking through false structures. The soul is trying to grow. But growth means death, the death of illusions, of outdated roles, of protective masks. And this death hurts. It's easier to return to comfort, to denial, to surface-level niceness. But if you stay the course, if you walk through the fire, what emerges on the other side is something stronger than perfection. Authenticity. An authentic person is not always likable. They don't always fit in. But they are grounded, clear, and trustworthy, because they are not hiding from themselves or others. Their yes means yes, and their no means no. They don't manipulate or sugarcoat. They live in alignment, even when it costs them approval. Jung believed this kind of authenticity was the root of true morality. Not obedience, not guilt, not conformity, but conscious choice. The ability to know your inner world so deeply that you act from awareness, not reflex. And here's where it gets even more profound. Once you are whole, your compassion becomes deeper. Because now you don't just tolerate other people's flaws. You understand them. You've seen your own. You've felt the struggle to grow. So instead of judging, you relate. Instead of rescuing, you support. Instead of preaching, you witness. This is the mark of someone truly good. Not someone who never fails, but someone who brings consciousness to their failures, who can admit, reflect, and change, who is not afraid to say, "I was wrong," who does not hide behind moral superiority but walks humbly with inner strength. And let's be clear, wholeness includes boundaries. Being good does not mean being used. Jung respected the power of the ego to protect the self. Integration means being kind and strong, giving and discerning, loving and walking away when necessary. In fact, Jung believed that a strong ego was necessary for individuation. You need a sense of self before you can transcend it. You need to own your desires before you can master them. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Accepting yourself, not just the parts you like, but the entire psychic spectrum, is the only path to inner peace. Without it, you're always chasing approval, virtue, or control. With it, you're free. So how does this look in everyday life? It looks like a person who no longer betrays themselves to avoid conflict, who says, "That doesn't work for me," without guilt, who expresses their anger in words, not explosions, who lets others carry their own weight, who stops performing kindness and starts living truth. It looks like someone who faces their shame instead of hiding it, who confronts their addictions, their patterns, their projections, who owns their story, even the chapters they'd rather erase. It looks like someone who refuses to be defined by their trauma, who walks back into the darkness not to stay there, but to retrieve what was lost. Innocence, power, voice, creativity, soul. This is what it means to be truly good. Not spotless, not saintly, but whole. Because the wholeness Jung describes is not selfish, it's sacred. The more of yourself you reclaim, the more present you become, the more grounded, the more available for real love, real service, real impact. Jung didn't want people to be saints. He wanted them to be human, fully, courageously, and consciously human. And in a world full of masks and performance, nothing is more powerful than that. Carl Jung's most unsettling, yet empowering idea is this: To be truly good, you must first become dangerous. Not reckless, not violent, not cruel, but dangerous in the sense that you are no longer easily manipulated, controlled, or broken. You are no longer soft in the way the world exploits. You are strong in the way the soul demands. This idea flies in the face of what many people are taught about morality. From childhood, we're often told to be nice, obedient, well-behaved. But Jung knew that unexamined niceness often hides weakness, and that weakness, when stretched too far, becomes resentment, collapse, or even destruction. He believed that the path to psychological health was not in suppressing your power, but in claiming it, consciously, responsibly, and fully. So what does it mean to become dangerous in the right way? It begins with confronting the parts of yourself you've denied, the part that wants to speak truth, even when it will upset others, the part that refuses to be treated poorly, the part that can walk away from toxic love, the part that says, "Enough." That is your inner sword. And many good people have spent their entire lives pretending they don't have one. But Jung's advice was simple. Sharpen your sword, carry it, and most importantly, know when to use it. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive. It means becoming sovereign. People who are dangerous in the right way don't need to dominate. They don't need to shout. Their energy speaks for them. Their boundaries are clear. Their presence commands respect. Not because they demand it, but because they've become someone who respects themselves. They are not afraid to be disliked because they are no longer addicted to approval. They are not afraid of conflict because they no longer confuse peace with silence. They are not afraid of loss because they know who they are without the things they used to cling to. This inner danger, this grounded, integrated power, is what makes you truly free. And freedom, Jung believed, is the foundation of real love, creativity, and purpose. Without danger, you cannot be free. This is why Jung didn't trust the persona, the mask we wear in society. It's often full of performance and posturing. We show people our best face. We hide our rage, our sexuality, our doubt, our darkness. But the more you hide, the more power you give to the unconscious, the more split you become. And that split creates suffering, not just for you, but for everyone around you. The solution is not to act out your darkness, but to integrate it. Jung believed that every human being had what he called the shadow, a collection of all the traits, instincts, and desires we've pushed away because they didn't match our self-image. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, it leaks, it erupts. Unless we bring it to consciousness, it sabotages our lives from behind the scenes. To become dangerous in the right way is to bring the shadow into the light. It is to look at the part of you that wants revenge and understand it without letting it lead. It is to feel the part of you that wants control and find where it's rooted in fear. It is to hear the part of you that screams, "No more," and learn to honor it without shame. This process creates a human being who is not divided, but whole, who is not perfect, but real, who is not tame, but trustworthy. Because when you've seen your own darkness, you don't fear others. You don't need to destroy it, control it, or deny it. You can face it, and that is real power. Consider this. The people who are most dangerous in the wrong way are often those who are disconnected from their shadow. They believe they are pure, righteous, beyond reproach. They moralize, they judge, they dominate. But underneath their goodness is a festering wound, one they've never looked at, and which now controls them unconsciously. By contrast, the person who has integrated their shadow doesn't pretend to be good. They are good because they've earned it. They've suffered. They've owned their flaws. They've felt the cost of their choices. And now, when they act from love, it is not fear wearing a mask. It is courage wearing truth. This is the final transformation Jung speaks of. Not becoming something higher, but becoming fully human, with all the pain, power, and paradox that includes. It means standing in a room where everyone expects you to smile and say nothing, and instead, speaking the truth no one wants to hear. It means walking away from roles that once defined you, and facing the emptiness of not knowing who you are without them. It means losing friends, relationships, or approval, because you refuse to abandon yourself again. And it means finding, at last, that the person you were always trying to be was less powerful than the person you already are, beneath the layers. Jung's work reminds us, goodness without power is dangerous. But power without goodness is chaos. The goal is neither submission nor domination, but integration. To stand in the fire of your own contradictions and not be burned. To hold both love and rage and not be consumed. To walk the middle path, not because it's easy, but because it's true. So if you've spent your life being the good one, the nice one, the accommodating one, this is your invitation. Not to stop being kind, but to start being whole, to stop hiding your sword, to stop shrinking for others' comfort, to stop apologizing for the truth of who you are. Because a good person who cannot set boundaries becomes a prisoner. A loving person who cannot say no becomes a martyr. And a kind person who cannot claim their own power becomes a target. But a person who has met their shadow and integrated it becomes unshakable. They become dangerous in the right way. And that, Jung believed, is where your life truly begins.